At 2:17 a.m., the scrubbers in Bayport's waste-to-energy plant were still humming, the indicator lights still green. Nothing was broken, no alarms, no smoke in the control room. And yet outside, the air changed. People 2 miles downwind tasted metal on their tongues like a coin held too long between teeth. A thin, sour haze slid over the parking lot lights and made them look bruised. Phone cameras went up. Someone shouted gas, and the word spread faster than the wind. The stack monitors finally screamed, numbers climbing where they were supposed to flatten. The cleanup system hadn't failed like a machine, it had failed like a promise. A reaction that should have happened simply didn't. One technician ran back toward the sampling shed with a clipboard, swearing he'd seen something wrong in the feed logs. He made it to the door. Then he didn't come out. By sunrise, officials called it normal wear. But the mechanism was intact. Only the function had vanished. By the time the morning crews arrived, the parking lot already looked like a crime scene without the courtesy of yellow tape. News vans idled at the gate. A drone buzzed high above the stack, searching for drama in a column of ordinary steam. Evan stood at the security booth with his badge in his hand, like it was a guilty thing. He wasn't plant staff. He was the kind of person plants hired when they needed to prove they cared. An industrial safety consultant, brought in after the last incident to rewrite procedures, tighten audits, and tell everyone what they already knew in nicer words. He'd done this work long enough to recognize the pattern. When something goes wrong, the first response isn't curiosity, it's containment. A supervisor met him at the turnstile, eyes red from no sleep and too much coffee. "Evan, we've got it handled. We're cooperating. We don't need extra noise." "Extra noise is what you call a dead witness?" Evan said. The supervisor didn't flinch. "We're calling it a medical event. Heat stress, panic, whatever helps. The county wants it clean. The company wants it clean. You want it clean." Evan did not want it clean. Not anymore. 3 years earlier, he'd signed off on a risk assessment for a refinery in Louisiana, one of those reports that always sounded cautious, but still ended in approval. A valve failed during a startup, a flare lit up the night like a second sun, and 2 contractors never went home. The investigation found multiple contributing factors, which meant everyone apologized and nobody was truly responsible. Except Evan couldn't shake the one line in his own report. Low probability of cascading failure. It was a sentence that had looked professional on paper. It looked like a lie on a memorial plaque. That mistake followed him into every meeting room and every hotel lobby. It had turned his career into a kind of penance. Show up, ask the uncomfortable questions, and try to make sure the next funeral wasn't scheduled by paperwork. Now he was back in another plant, another morning after, with another official story forming like concrete. At the gate, a county inspector in a hard hat approached, flanked by a plant manager and a woman in a blazer who never introduced herself. The inspector gave Evan a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Evan," he said, as if the first name were a brand. "You're not on today's authorized roster. Corporate requested we limit access. Liability reasons." The woman in the blazer added, "We appreciate your concern. But this is moving into a regulatory review. Let the process work." Evan looked past them at the stack. The green lights were still on. That was the problem. "Process," he repeated. "Or narrative?" The plant manager's jaw tightened. "Go home, Evan. Don't make this worse." He turned as if to leave. He took 3 steps, then paused, because he could already feel the old version of himself accepting the dismissal, grateful to be told there was nothing to do. He hated that version. Evan walked to his truck, waited until their attention drifted back to the cameras, and then circled around the service road toward the maintenance entrance, an old habit from audits. Doors, like stories, always had a side way in. He wasn't supposed to be on shift, so he came back anyway. Evan slipped through the maintenance entrance with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent his life learning where rules were soft. The hallway smelled of detergent and hot metal. Somewhere deeper inside, pumps thumped like a heartbeat. He found Maya in the lab. She was small, sharp-eyed, and wrapped in a white coat that had seen too many long nights. A row of sample jars sat on the bench beside her, gray dust, pale pellets, a smear of something black like charcoal. Maya didn't look up when he entered. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, still focused on the scale. "Neither is a toxic plume," Evan answered. That made her glance up. Recognition flickered. Not friendship, more like shared exhaustion. "They told you to leave?" "They told me to stop asking questions." Maya set down her tweezers and nodded toward the sample jars. "Then you're in the right room." On paper, the plant's cleanup system was simple. Dirty exhaust came out of the furnace full of bad actors: nitrogen oxides, sulfur compounds, traces of acid gases. Before that, exhaust went into the sky. It passed through a reactor packed with catalyst, a material designed to speed up a reaction without being used up. That last part was what everyone liked to repeat. Catalysts don't get consumed. It sounded like magic. It sounded safe. In reality, catalysts were like hard-working employees. They didn't get eaten, but they could be ruined. Maya slid a tray toward Evan. On it were small honeycomb-shaped blocks, ceramic monoliths coated with a thin, active layer. "These sit in the SCR unit," she said. "Selective catalytic reduction. Ammonia gets injected. Nitrogen oxides get converted mostly into nitrogen and water. Clean enough to meet permits when it works." Evan picked one up. It was light, almost fragile. And today it didn't. Maya turned to a stainless steel cabinet the size of a mini-fridge. She opened it to reveal a compact test rig, a tube furnace, gas lines, a sensor array. "I pulled 2 pieces," she said. "One from the bed that failed, one from a spare that's been sealed in storage." She spoke like she was reading a recipe, because calm was the only way to stop fear from taking over. "Same temperature," she continued. "Same flow, same ammonia injection, same NOx concentration. Watch the outlet." She clicked a switch. Numbers stabilized on the screen. The spare sample performed beautifully. The outlet NOx dropped fast, like a door closing. Maya pointed at the graph with the tip of a pen. "That's what it should look like. The chemistry grabs the pollutants and turns them into harmless stuff before they escape." Then she swapped in the failed sample. Everything stayed normal. Pressure, temperature, flow. The apparatus looked healthy. The graph didn't. Outlet NOx barely moved. Evan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "It's not reacting." "It's alive," Maya said quietly, "but it's not doing its job." She opened a small vial and held it up. Inside was powder so fine it clung to the glass. "Now, here's the part they'll call wear." Evan watched her sprinkle the tiniest pinch, barely a dusting, onto the spare catalyst sample. It was almost comical, like seasoning food. She put the sample back into the rig. The graph changed instantly. The outlet NOx stayed high, stubborn and flat, like the system had given up. Evan leaned closer to the display. "That's all it takes?" Maya nodded. "A microdose. Parts per million, sometimes less. Certain compounds coat the active sites. Think of the catalyst as a parking lot where reactions need to park to happen. This stuff fills the spaces. The reaction doesn't slow down because the machine is broken. It stops because the chemistry has nowhere to land. What is it? Evan asked. Maya hesitated. Could be several things. Phosphorus, heavy metals, silicone compounds, even certain oils. The point is, if someone wanted to shut down cleanup without smashing equipment, they wouldn't have to, Evan finished. He stared at the tiny vial, at how harmless it looked, how easy it would be to carry in a pocket. And the story forming outside, the neat one about aging parts and bad luck, suddenly felt less like ignorance and more like strategy. If a catalyst could be killed without visible damage, then sabotage could wear the mask of routine failure. Evan set the vial down as if it might bite. They're going to bury this, he said. Maya's voice was flat. They already are. Evan looked at the test rig again, at the perfect control conditions, at the reaction that vanished with a dusting of poison. He made a choice that tasted like trouble. Then we don't let them, he said, and walked back toward the plant like the rules had just become optional. The first thing Evan did was request the obvious. Chain of custody sampling, full spectrum analysis, the kind of paperwork that made regulators feel safe and lawyers feel busy. He framed it politely, the way you did when you wanted a yes from people trained to say no. The answer came back in a meeting room that smelled of stale pastries and fresh denial. A director from corporate risk sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, but posture perfect. Beside him, the county inspector tapped a pen like a metronome. The woman in the blazer, still nameless, watched Evan as if he were a crack in a windshield, something you fixed before it spread. We'll do standard tests, the director said. Where metals, sulfur, ash. We're not authorizing an expansive fishing expedition. It's not a fishing expedition, Evan replied. It's how you find what doesn't want to be found. The inspector leaned forward. Mr. Evan, even if there's a contaminant, we need to be realistic. Trace levels happen. The furnace eats trash. Every day is a chemistry set. Evan opened his notebook and slid a printed graph across the table. The before and after from Maya's demo. 2 curves, one clean, one dead. Trace levels don't do this, he said. Not unless the trace is the point. The corporate director didn't even glance at it. You're talking about parts per million, he said. Maybe parts per billion, formally negligible. Our permits are written around thresholds. Our legal exposure is written around thresholds. If you can't show a violation above those thresholds, you're asking us to shut down a facility based on a theory. There it was, the trap hidden inside the word negligible. In law, small often meant not actionable. In chemistry, small could mean fatal. Evan left the meeting with no authority, no badge access he hadn't already stolen back through habit, and a growing sense that the real battle wasn't over what happened. It was over what could be proven in a way that would survive a courtroom. Maya met him in a corridor outside the lab. They'll call it background, she said. They'll call it a rounding error, Evan answered, and a rounding error just killed a man. That night, he and Maya did what the official process refused to do. They stopped trusting averages. They pulled shift logs, not the polished summaries, but the ugly raw data. Feed rates, reagent consumption, pressure drops across the catalyst bed. Evan had learned long ago that lies lived in the smoothened graphs. Truth lived in the jagged edges. At 2:17 a.m., the same minute the plume began, the ammonia injection rate spiked briefly, then corrected. Not enough to alarm, just enough to look like a control loop hiccup. But the NOx conversion never recovered. It stayed flat until the end of the shift. Evan traced the timeline backward, finger moving line by line. "What about the shift before?" he asked. Maya typed, pulled up the trend. "Normal, stable, healthy conversion." "Shift after?" Evan asked. "Normal again, after they swapped out catalyst blocks in a hurry, blamed unexpected deactivation, and wrote it up as accelerated aging." Maya stared at the screen, then at Evan. "So, it only happens in one shift?" "One window," Evan said. "One set of hands." That detail shattered the comforting randomness of accident. Ware didn't take lunch breaks. Corrosion didn't care who was on duty. But sabotage? Sabotage loved schedules. Sabotage picked moments. They built a list of who had been present: operators, maintenance techs, the overnight supervisor, the contractor crew that serviced the reagent lines. Evan didn't look for villains and faces. He looked for access. Who touched what? Who could add something without leaving a signature? Maya pulled inventory records for the reagent supply, ammonia solution, urea, water for dilution, the dust filters upstream. Evan expected a messy mess. Instead, he found something worse: neatness. Gaps filled by identical handwriting. A delivery slip scanned twice with different timestamps. "Someone's cleaning the trail," he muttered. He took the prints to the plant manager. Not in a meeting room this time. He cornered him near the control center, where the constant hum made it harder for conversations to be recorded. "Only one shift," Evan said. "Only one event. That's not random." The plant manager's eyes flicked toward the glassed-in control room, then back. "Evan, stop." "You want to know what stop looks like?" Evan asked. "Stop is a second plume. Stop is a lawsuit that closes this place for good. Stop is someone deciding the cheapest solution is to let it happen again and call it aging." The manager's voice dropped. "You don't understand the pressure." "I understand pressure," Evan said. "Pressure is what turns small things into explosions." The manager exhaled hard. "Corporate has a bid out," he admitted, almost against his will. "A new contract. Multi-state. This plant is a flagship. If we look like we can't control emissions, we lose it." "And if you admit sabotage?" Evan asked. The manager's mouth tightened. "Then we look like we can't control our own people." Evan felt the shape of the motive forming. Not personal, not dramatic. Economic. A tender worth tens of millions. Reputation. Insurance. The quiet calculus that made a dead witness a medical event. And a poisoned catalyst. Where? He went higher, because when you're being ignored, you either quit or you climb. He called a contact at a federal office. Someone he'd met years ago during the refinery investigation. The voice on the other end was cautious, interested, and immediately burdened by procedure. "You're telling me someone can shut down emissions control with trace contaminants?" the agent asked. "Yes," Evan said, "and make it look like normal degradation." "Do you have proof of intentional introduction?" the agent asked. Evan stared through the corridor window at the plant's live monitor. Green lights, compliant numbers, because they'd already replaced the catalyst. "Not yet," he admitted. "Then you have a theory," the agent said, "and I can't open a case on a theory." Evan hung up and felt the walls closing in. The science was real. The effect was repeatable. But the system, legal, corporate, political, was built to demand a smoking gun, not a poisoned parking lot. That's when the opponent finally stepped into the open. Her name, Evan learned from a whispered introduction, was Claire. She wasn't county, wasn't corporate, and wasn't plant staff. She was liaison, which meant she belonged to whoever paid for silence. Claire found him outside the lab as he and Maya packed samples into sealed bags. She smiled as if they'd met at a fundraiser. "Evan," she said warmly, "you're very persistent." "I'm very employed by reality," he replied. Her smile didn't fade. "Reality has budgets, timelines, stakeholders. This plant supplies power to hospitals, water treatment, municipal contracts. Shutting it down isn't a heroic gesture. It's a public crisis." "So is poisoning the air," Evan said. Claire's eyes sharpened. "Words matter," she said. "If you call this sabotage without a definitive chain, you create panic. You trigger regulatory holds. You collapse the tender. You invite shareholder action. And then they'll need someone to blame for overreach." Evan felt the hook slide under his ribs. "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining incentives," Claire said. "If you force a stop on this line, you'll be the story. Not the chemistry, not the mysterious trace contaminant. You, the consultant who overreacted." Maya's hands tightened around the sample bag. Evan could see fear in her eyes. Fear not of poison, but of paperwork, of being blacklisted, of being made responsible for things far larger than a lab bench. Evan kept his voice level. "If the contaminant is so negligible," he said, "why are you here?" Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Because negligible things are easy to deny," she whispered, "and impossible to explain to a jury once people start dying." She left with the same calm she arrived with, as if she'd simply delivered a weather report. Evan watched her go, then turned back to Maya. "They're not afraid of the science," he said. "They're afraid of a shutdown." Maya swallowed. "And if we don't shut down?" Evan looked at the stack monitor, green, innocent, smiling. He imagined the catalyst bed, porous and patient, waiting to be seasoned with the wrong dust. "To prove it," Evan said, "we have to stop the line at the exact moment the poison arrives." Maya's face paled. "They'll make you the reason the city loses power." "They'll make me the reason for everything," Evan said. And he realized the price of knowledge wasn't just being right. It was being the most convenient person to punish for refusing to be quiet. Evan didn't sleep. He sat in his truck at the edge of the employee lot, watching shift change like it was a tide. Headlights came and went. People laughed too loudly, the way they did when they wanted to pretend the air hadn't tried to kill them yesterday. Near dawn, Maya slid into the passenger seat with a paper cup of coffee and a file folder that looked like it weighed more than it should. "I found out who went to the sampling shed," she said. Evan already knew the name from the incident report. Technician, male, collapsed. Clean phrasing for a messy end. But Maya added something the report didn't. "His name was Jonah," she said. "And he wasn't just running toward the shed because he panicked." She opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots of the plant's internal maintenance chat. Messages that hadn't been meant for outsiders. Jonah's username popped up again and again, time-stamped in the weeks leading to the plume. Why are the seals on the reagent totes different? Who signed off on this vendor? This isn't the same batch code as last month. Evan felt his stomach tighten. He noticed the supply chain. Maya nodded. He noticed a pattern. He flagged it to his supervisor. Twice. The second time he wrote, "If the catalyst drops again, check the feed additives. It's not where." Evan stared at the final message, the one sent an hour before 2:17 a.m. "I'm going to pull a sample myself. If I'm right, we've got a serious problem." Maya's voice went thin. He knew. And then he died at the exact place where the proof would have been. The death wasn't collateral. It was cover. a second act layered over the first. The plume to create chaos, the chaos to erase the witness to keep the method invisible. Evan's hands gripped the steering wheel. So they didn't just poison the catalyst, he said. They poisoned the investigation. For a moment, his old plan felt almost laughable. March in, hit the emergency stop, force everyone to see the line go quiet. A public shutdown. A dramatic gesture, proof by interruption. Claire's warning replayed in his mind, but now it carried a darker edge. If someone could dose the system silently, then a shutdown wasn't just a political grenade. It was a signal flare. A public stop would tell the saboteur they were close. It would force the opponent to act again, harder, faster, less subtle. If the first plume had been negligible, the next could be lethal by design. Maya watched him think. If we stop them openly, she said, they'll choose a worse moment. Evan nodded. They'll push it until the story becomes unignorable, until the city has to accept the accident narrative, because the alternative is admitting someone steering the wheel. He looked down at Jonah's screenshots again. The seals, the batch codes, the vendor shift. Then we don't chase the chemistry in the reactor, Evan said slowly. We chase the hands feeding it. Maya blinked. How? Evan pointed to the line about the seals. Consumables, he said. Everything that enters the process has a route, receiving dock, storage cage, shift handoff. And everything has a tamper story, a seal, a tag, a barcode, a signature that's supposed to mean untouched. Maya's eyes sharpened. Jonah was tracking the tote seals. Then we track them better, Evan said. Not by announcing a shutdown, by setting a quiet trap. They wouldn't try to prove sabotage by halting the plant. They'd prove it by catching the negligible poison at the moment it arrived, hidden in the very thing that was supposed to be routine. A sealed container, a normal delivery, a harmless-looking replenishment, a feeding. They set the trap on a Tuesday night because Tuesday was quiet. No tours, no board visits, no cameras hunting for a follow-up story. Quiet nights were when routines became invisible, and invisibility was the saboteur's favorite tool. Maya stayed in the lab with the test rig warmed and ready. Evan walked the plant with a small roll of evidence tape and a cheap body camera clipped under his jacket. Nothing cinematic, just a blinking red dot that said, "This is real." The reagent totes arrived at 11:40 p.m. 2 plastic cubes in metal cages, labeled as ordinary supply. A forklift driver dropped them in the storage bay and left. The paperwork looked perfect. The seals looked perfect. Evan photographed everything anyway. Seal numbers, batch codes, the scuffs on the cages, the exact position of the pallets relative to the floor markings. He added his own thin strip of evidence tape across the tote cap, so delicate it would tear if touched, then stepped back into the shadows behind a maintenance stairwell. At 1:58 a.m., a door hissed open. A figure in coveralls rolled a cart into the bay. Not a thief creeping like a movie villain, just someone moving with the bored efficiency of a person who belonged there. The badge reader had let them in. The building trusted them. They stopped at the tote, leaned in, and, very carefully, worked the cap. The evidence tape snapped. Evan didn't rush. He let the camera drink in the moment. Gloved hands, a small squeeze bottle pulled from a pocket, a thin stream disappearing into the tote like nothing at all. No sparks, no smell, no dramatic sabotage. Just a microdose, delivered with the confidence of repetition. Evan stepped out. Don't move. The figure froze, then bolted. Fast, desperate, Evan chased, shouting for security, and the night exploded into echoes. Boots on concrete, radios crackling, the alarm of a door forced open. They caught the runner near the loading dock, pinned between a chain-link gate and two security guards, who finally woke up to their own job. The squeeze bottle clattered to the ground. Evan scooped it up with a gloved hand, sealed it in a bag, and handed it to Maya's runner like it was a live ember. Within minutes, Maya called from the lab. Her voice didn't shake this time. "It kills the reaction," she said. "Same as before. It's a poison, and it's concentrated." The plant manager arrived, face drained of color. Claire arrived too, still calm until she saw the broken evidence tape and the camera on Evan's chest. For the first time, her smile failed. County deputies took the saboteur away in handcuffs, and the story changed shape in real time. Cameras that had once filmed wear and tear now filmed an arrest. Regulators who had once urged caution now demanded records. A federal agent called Evan back before sunrise. "We're expanding the inquiry," the agent said. "Supply chain, vendors, internal access logs, the whole route." That was the victory. Evan didn't get to keep it. By noon, corporate's lawyers had drafted their version of events. Evan had trespassed, interfered with operations, created liability exposure, and used unauthorized recording equipment on site. The plant manager, terrified of the tender, the headlines, the board, signed the termination paperwork with hands that wouldn't meet Evan's eyes. His professional license review followed quickly, like a second wave. They didn't accuse him of being wrong. They accused him of breaking protocol to be right. Maya met him outside the gate as he packed his truck. "You saved the shift," she said. "If you hadn't caught it," Evan shut the tailgate and looked up at the stack, breathing harmless steam again, at least for now. "People think the danger is the chemical," he said, "or the machine." He shook his head. "The most dangerous thing is the person who chooses when the reaction happens," Evan said, "because timing turns negligible into lethal." Behind them, investigators walked into the plant with clipboards and warrants, following the trail Jonah had tried to chase alone. And this time, the trail didn't end at Astar normal wear.